They say that the airport is a place of new beginnings, a portal to a wider world. But standing there under the sterile, humming fluorescent lights of Terminal B, holding a ticket purchased by my own son, I didn't know I was holding my own death warrant. David's voice was tight, pitched a little too high, cutting through the low roar of the departing crowd. He was walking 3 steps ahead of me, his hand gripping the handle of my new carry-on bag so tightly that his knuckles were white. He looked back, sweat beading on his forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning of the terminal. "I'm moving as fast as these old knees will let me, David," I said, adjusting the collar of my coat. "The flight doesn't leave for 3 hours." "It's not running, it's being efficient," he snapped, then softened his tone instantly, a mask slipping back into place. "I just want to make sure you get settled, Dad. You know how anxious you get with security. I want this to be perfect." The mention of Martha stung, just as he knew it would. It had been 6 months since I buried her, 6 months of silence in a house that used to be filled with music and the smell of baking bread. David knew that grief was the only thing that had convinced me to agree to this trip. A month in Southeast Asia, a healing retreat, he called it. He had arranged everything, the flights, the hotels, the itinerary. He had even bought me the luggage. "I appreciate it, son," I said, feeling a surge of guilt for my irritation. "I really do. I know I haven't been easy to be around lately. The business, the house." "That's exactly why you need to go," David said, stopping near the entrance to the security queue. He turned to me, his eyes darting around the crowd, scanning the faces of strangers. He looked manic, vibrating with an energy I couldn't place. "You need to leave it all behind. Just go, relax, sit on a beach. Let me handle the estate, let me handle the company accounts." He thrust the carry-on bag toward me. It was a handsome thing, dark brown leather, heavy and expensive. He had given it to me yesterday, insisting I use it instead of my battered old canvas duffel. "Here," he said. I reached for the handle, but he didn't let go immediately. He held on to it for a fraction of a second too long, a strange tug-of-war happening between us. "It's heavy," I noted, taking the weight. "What did you pack in here?" David laughed, but the sound was brittle, like dry leaves crunching underfoot. "Just some essentials, books, your toiletries, and—" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I should open it." His shout was sudden, startling a woman standing nearby. David flinched, lowering his voice to a frantic whisper. He grabbed my shoulder, his fingers digging into my coat. "No, Dad, don't open it, not until you get to the hotel in Bangkok. Promise me. It's personal. It's something from Mom. I wrapped it up special. If you open it now, you'll ruin the moment. Just—" "Let the TSA scan it. It's fine." I looked at him, confused by the intensity in his eyes. He was sweating profusely now, a droplet running down his temple. I attributed it to the stress of the goodbye, the burden of taking over the family responsibilities while I was gone. "Okay, David," I said softly, "I promise." He let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. "Good, good, that's—" He pulled me into a hug. It should have been a warm moment, a son sending his grieving father off on a journey of healing. But his body was rigid, stiff as a board. He patted my back twice, hard, mechanical thumps, and then pulled away as if my skin were burning him. "I have to go," he said, checking his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. "Meeting with the investors. Go on, Dad, get in line. Don't look back." "I love you, son," I said. "Yeah," he said, already turning away. He didn't say he loved me back. He turned and walked away fast, almost jogging, disappearing into the throng of people heading toward the exit. He didn't look back once. I stood there for a moment, feeling a strange, cold heaviness settle in my chest. I told myself it was just separation anxiety. I told myself I was being a sentimental old fool. I turned and joined the end of the security line, clutching my boarding pass in one hand and the heavy leather bag in the other. The line was long, a snake of weary travelers shuffling toward the scanners. The noise was overwhelming, crying babies, barking TSA agents, the clatter of plastic trays. I moved forward automatically, lost in my thoughts. I was thinking about Martha. I was thinking about how much she would have hated this, the crowds, the noise. She loved her garden. She loved quiet. I was 10 feet away from the ID check podium when it happened. A young woman, disheveled, wearing a faded hiking backpack that looked like it had seen 3 continents, stumbled into me. It wasn't a gentle graze. It was a hard, deliberate shoulder check that nearly knocked me off balance. I exclaimed, steadying myself on the stanchion rope. She was right in my face, invading my personal space. She smelled of unwashed clothes and stale coffee, but her eyes were sharp, terrified, and piercingly blue. "I'm so sorry," she said loudly, for the benefit of the people around us. But then she leaned in, her lips brushing my ear, her voice dropping to a desperate hiss. "Don't look at me, just read it." I froze. She grabbed my hand, squeezing it hard. I felt a ball of crumpled paper being pressed into my palm. "What?" I started. "Don't," she whispered. "Just read it. Go to the bathroom." She pulled away, feigning embarrassment. "Sorry again, sir." She turned and melted into the crowd, ducking under a rope and heading back toward the ticketing counters, moving with the speed of someone who was being hunted. I stood there, the rhythm of the airport continuing around me, but my world had stopped. The paper in my hand felt hot, radioactive. I looked at the agent. I looked at the scanner machines looming ahead, the gray tunnels that see through everything. The agent barked. I need a moment," I stammered. "Bathroom." I stepped out of the line, ignoring the grumbles of the businessman behind me. I walked as fast as I could toward the men's restroom, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt sick. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I pushed into the restroom. It was empty, save for a janitor mopping the far end. I ducked into the oversized handicap stall and locked the door. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped a crumpled paper on the tile floor. I knelt to pick it up. I unfolded the cheap, rough napkin. The writing was scrawled in black ink, hurried, jagged, the letters digging into the paper. "I saw him, your son, in the parking garage. He had a knife. He cut the lining of the brown bag. He put something inside, a black brick. He taped it shut. He looked crazy. Please don't go. They will arrest you." I sat down on the closed toilet lid. The air left my lungs. The noise of the airport faded into a high-pitched, deafening ringing in my ears. David, my David. He put something inside. I stared at the note. Denial tried to rise up, tried to tell me this was a prank, a mistake, a crazy woman's delusion. But then I remembered David's sweat. I remembered his manic insistence that I not open the bag. I remembered the coldness of his hug. If anyone's listening, if you are sitting there right now thinking your family is your fortress, thinking that blood is thicker than water, don't make the mistake I did. Don't let love blind you to the knife in your hand. I wish someone had warned me that the people we carry on our shoulders are often the ones waiting to slit our throats. I looked at the bag sitting on the floor. I reached for it. My hands felt numb, like they didn't belong to me. I unzipped the main compartment. It was packed neatly, clothes, toiletries, a few books. Just like he said. I pulled everything out, dumping my shirts and socks onto the dirty tile floor. The bag was empty. I ran my hand along the bottom lining. It felt smooth. Then I pressed harder. There. It was subtle, almost imperceptible if you weren't looking for it. A ridge, a slight unevenness beneath the fabric floor of the bag. "Don't open it until the hotel," he had said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my house keys, the keys to the house David had been asking me to sign over to him for 6 months. I used the jagged edge of the front door key to saw at the fabric lining. It was tough, high-quality leather, but I tore at it with a savage desperation. Rip! The lining gave way. I pulled the fabric back. My breath hitched in a sob that I choked back before it could escape. Taped to the hard plastic shell of the bag's bottom, wrapped tightly in layers of heavy black electrical tape, was a brick. It was about the size of a hardcover book. I peeled back the corner of the tape. White powder. Dense. Packed tight. I am not a chemist nor a criminal, but I knew what I was looking at. This was heroin, or cocaine, a kilogram of it, maybe more. I stared at it, my mind racing through the calculations of a nightmare. I was flying to a country with zero tolerance for drug trafficking, a country where the mandatory sentence for this amount wasn't prison, it was a firing squad. I leaned over the toilet and vomited. I retched until my stomach was empty, until my throat burned with acid. The physical shock of the betrayal brought me to my knees on the cold tile. He didn't just want me gone. He didn't just want me out of the way so he could take control of the company. He wanted me erased. He wanted me to walk through those scanners, get pulled aside, and disappear into a foreign legal system that would execute me within the year. He wanted to play the grieving son, my father, the secret addict, my father, the smuggler. Who knew? He wanted the state to kill me so his hands would look clean. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. I stared at the white powder peeking out from the black tape. My first instinct was to run out of the stall and find a police officer, to scream, "Look, look what he did!" But then the cold, hard logic of survival kicked in. If I went to the police now, what would happen? It was my bag. I had checked in. I was the one holding it. David was gone. He would deny everything. He would say I was senile, that grief had driven me mad, that I must have gotten involved with bad people. He was charming. He was young. He was respectable. I was just a confused old man with a kilo of drugs in his luggage. No, I couldn't call the police. Not yet. I stood up. I felt weak, hollowed out, as if my bones had been removed. But in the center of that hollowness, a spark lit. It wasn't hope. It was rage. A cold, black rage that matched the tape on the brick. I used the duct tape to seal the lining back up as best as I could. I repacked the clothes. I zipped the bag. I went to the sink and washed my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. The man looking back at me was pale, his eyes rimmed with red, but his jaw was set. The confused, grieving widower was gone. He had died in that stall. I walked out of the restroom. I didn't look at the security checkpoint. I walked past it. I walked past the ticket counters. I walked toward the exit doors, toward the arrivals level. The automatic doors slid open, and the cold city air hit me. It smelled of exhaust fumes and rain. I walked to the taxi stand, clutching the handle of the bag that was meant to be my coffin. I looked down the long line of cars dropping people off. And then I saw him. 50 yards away, parked in the loading zone, was David's silver Audi. He hadn't left. He was sitting there, the engine idling. I stepped behind a concrete pillar, watching him. He was on his phone. He was laughing. I could see his head thrown back, his teeth flashing in a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. He wasn't mourning his father's departure. He was celebrating his victory. He thought I was in the security line. He thought I was already walking through the scanners. He thought it was done. I stood there in the exhaust fumes, the cold wind biting my face, watching the son I had raised laugh about my murder. The grief evaporated. The sadness turned to ash. He wanted me to take a trip? Fine. I turned away from the terminal and signaled for a taxi. I wasn't going to Asia. I was going to war. There is a specific kind of hollowness that comes from realizing you are homeless while holding the keys to your own front door. I didn't go home. Home was the first place David would look if he suspected I hadn't boarded that plane. And it was the first place he would start looting the moment he thought I was halfway over the Pacific Ocean. Instead, I drove the rental car to the outskirts of the city, to a part of town where the streetlights flickered and the shadows stretched long and thin. I pulled into the Starlight Motor Inn, a place that smelled of stale cigarettes, industrial cleaner, and the quiet desperation of anonymity. I checked into room 12, paying cash. I locked the door, deadbolted it, and pulled the curtains tight. I sat the leather duffel bag on the stained bedspread. It looked innocuous there, just a piece of expensive luggage, not a container for a life sentence. I sat in the wobbly chair by the window and dialed the only number I knew I could trust. "Miller?" A gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "It's Arthur," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow, scraped clean of emotion. "Arthur? I thought you were wheels up for Thailand by now." "I didn't get on the plane, Miller. I need you to come to the Starlight off Route 9. Bring your kit. And Miller." Detective Frank Miller had retired from the Vice Squad 5 years ago, but he carried the weight of the job in the lines of his face and the permanent wariness in his eyes. We had served in the reserves together 40 years ago, digging trenches in the mud, watching each other's backs. He arrived 40 minutes later, wearing a trench coat and a look of deep concern. He didn't ask questions when I let him in. He just looked at me, then at the bag on the bed. "Show me," he said. I unzipped the bag. I showed him the slash in the lining. I peeled back the duct tape I had used to effect a temporary repair in the airport bathroom. Miller looked at the black brick. He didn't touch it. He leaned in, sniffing the air, his eyes narrowing. He pulled a small penknife from his pocket, carefully pricking the plastic, then touching the tip of the blade to a chemical test strip he kept in his wallet. The strip turned a violent shade of blue. "Jesus, Arthur," Miller breathed, stepping back and running a hand through his thinning gray hair. "That's a full key, high purity." "If you had walked through customs in Bangkok with this, they wouldn't have even given you a trial." "He didn't just want me arrested," I said, the realization settling into my bones like lead. "He wanted me dead," Miller asked, though he already knew the answer. "David," I confirmed. "He packed the bag. He insisted I take it." Miller paced the small room, his shoes crunching on the cheap carpet. "We need more than the bag, Arthur. If we go to the cops now, it's your word against his. He'll say you're senile or that you have a secret habit. He's slick." "There was a girl," I said, remembering the terrified eyes of the backpacker. "At the airport. She bumped into me. She gave me a note." Miller stopped pacing. "A witness?" I handed him the crumpled napkin. Miller studied it, then pulled out his phone. "I still have friends at TSA and airport security. If she was close enough to see him pack this, she's on camera." We spent the next 24 hours in that motel room, turning it into a command center. I watched Miller work the phones, calling in favors, bullying old contacts. By noon the next day, he had her. Sarah, a college student heading to Europe. Miller caught her before she boarded her connecting flight in Newark. She was terrified, but she agreed to talk. She had recorded a video on her phone from the parking garage. Just a snippet, thinking she was capturing a weird guy damaging luggage, until she realized what he was putting inside. "She says he looked demonic," Miller told me, putting the phone down. "She's emailing the file." "Not yet," I said. I pulled out my phone. David thought I was a technophobe, an old man who struggled to change the input on the TV. He didn't know I had installed a redundant security system in the house last year, one that linked directly to a private server. I opened the app. The grainy black and white feed of my living room filled the screen. I watched, feeling a cold detachment, as David walked into my house. It was only 3 hours after he had dropped me off at the airport. He wasn't grieving. He wasn't pacing. He was popping a cork. I watched my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, pour a glass of my vintage champagne. He picked up his phone. I tapped the audio button, and his voice filled the motel room, tinny but clear. "It's done, Chloe," he said, laughing. He took a sip, kicking his feet up on my coffee table, feet still wearing the muddy shoes from the airport. I watched him listen to his wife on the other end. "No, don't worry about the will," he said, waving his hand at the empty room. "Once he's detained, I get power of attorney by default. Call the realtor. List the estate for cash buyers only. We need to move fast. He was selling everything. My art, my furniture, the chair he was sitting in. The legacy I had built to leave to him was being sold for scrap so he could cash out quick. "He's throwing a party," I said, watching him hang up and start making more calls. "Tonight? He's inviting everyone." "The board?" Miller asked, disgusted. "A victory lap," I corrected. Miller looked at me. "We have the video from Sarah. We have the drugs. We have the confession on your security cam." "No," I said, standing up. I buttoned my coat. I looked in the mirror. I looked tired, old, and battered, but my eyes were clear. He wanted a show. He wanted a public send-off. The climax began at 8 p.m. I drove my rental car to the end of the block and parked in the shadows. My house was blazing with light. Cars lined the driveway, Mercedes, BMWs, the luxury vehicles of the vultures David called friends. I could hear the bass of the music thumping through the walls. I walked up the driveway. I had my house key in my hand. It felt heavy, like a weapon. Miller was right behind me, flanked by two uniformed officers he had coordinated with the local precinct. They hung back in the shadows of the porch. "Wait for my signal," I whispered. I slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. I opened the door and stepped into the foyer. The noise hit me first. Laughter, clinking glasses, the hum of conversation. The house was full of people, my people, neighbors I had barbecued with, business partners I had made rich. They were eating my food, drinking my wine, celebrating my departure. David was in the center of the living room, standing by the fireplace. He was holding a crystal tumbler of my oldest scotch. He looked flushed, triumphant, drunk on hubris. He raised the glass. The room quieted down. "To my father," David announced, his voice thick with fake emotion. "A titan of industry, a difficult man, but a man who taught me everything I know." "He certainly found the truth," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a razor blade. David froze. The glass in his hand slipped. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Amber liquid splashed across his shoes. He turned slowly. His face drained of color, turning a sickly, translucent gray. His eyes bulged. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. In a way, he was. He was seeing the ghost of the father he had murdered in his heart. He stammered. The word came out as a squeak. "You?" The guests gasped. A ripple of confusion went through the room. Chloe, standing near the kitchen with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, dropped the platter. It clattered loudly, but no one looked at her. Everyone was looking at me. "I decided to change my itinerary," I said calmly, stepping further into the room. I didn't shout, I didn't rage, I let the silence do the work. David's knees buckled. He grabbed the mantel for support. "The brick, David," I said, walking toward him. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. "The kilo of heroin you taped into the lining of the bag you gave me." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. "You're senile," David shouted, desperation cracking his voice. "He's confused. He's having an episode." "I think we'll call the police instead," I said. I nodded toward the door. Miller walked in, his badge gleaming under the chandelier lights. The two uniformed officers followed him, their faces grim. "David Sterling," Miller announced, his voice booming. David tried to run. It was a pathetic, instinctive scramble toward the patio doors. Miller didn't even have to run. He just stepped into David's path and tackled him to the Persian rug. The guests were screaming now, scrambling to get away from the scene. "David!" shrieked as Miller wrenched his arms behind his back. "It was her! It was Chloe! She made me do it!" I looked at Chloe. She was backing away into the kitchen, her face a mask of terror. An officer blocked her path. She screamed back at David. "You said he was useless!" They turned on each other like rats in a bucket, tearing each other apart to save their own skins. The betrayal had come full circle. I stood in the center of the chaos, an old man in a travel coat, watching the destruction of my family. I watched them drag my son out of the house. He was weeping, begging, calling out to me. "Dad! Dad, please!" I didn't answer. I just watched. As they hauled him past the open garage door, I saw it, leaning against the wall, ready to be planted in the yard the next morning. A for sale sign. Cash offers only. The police cleared the house. The guests fled into the night, their cars peeling out of the driveway. Miller stayed for a moment, putting a hand on my shoulder. "We got him, Arthur." "Thank you, Frank," I said softly. "Go, file the paperwork." He left. The house was empty now. The silence returned, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of before. It was a clean silence, a lonely silence. I walked to the fireplace. I looked at the shattered glass on the floor. I looked at the photo of Martha on the mantel. She looked kind, gentle. She would have been heartbroken, but she would have understood. We had raised a wolf, and tonight I had finally put him down. I walked to the kitchen. The bottle of champagne David had opened was sitting on the counter. I picked it up. I walked to the sink and poured the expensive golden liquid down the drain. I watched it swirl away, bubbling and frothing, just like the dreams I had for my son. I reached into the cupboard and pulled out a simple water glass. I filled it from the tap. I raised the glass to the empty room. "To survival," I whispered. I drank the water. It was cool and clear. I was alive. I had my dignity. And tomorrow I would change the locks.